Edward of Woodstock, known to history as the Black Prince, was the eldest son of King Edward III of England, and thus the heir to the English throne. He was born at 15th of June 1330. First thing first, during his life he was never called Black Prince, and unfortunately he must probably never wear a black armor, so we can disperse, nothing to see here. Joking guys, he really was a person worth talking about, though a controversial one. Some consider him as an example of chivalry, others says his nickname was not because of color of his armor. By the way, as to his nickname, he was called as such by John Leland in the 1530s or even early 1540s, some 165 plus years after Edward's death. He was sometimes called as Edward IV, but when real Edward IV was coronated in 1430, there was real confusion. Also, he could be easily confused with his father, Edward III. As to his armor, Edward was laid to rest with his battle swag. His surcoats, helmet, shield and gauntlets were preserved for longevity in bronze. Today these tokens remain kept in glass in Canterbury Cathedral, where he is buried, and as time passed, bronze went black because of black patina. So okay, let's start the story. Despite being a prince, he had a very tough life, more of a soldier and talented commander like Richard I. When a politician, he spent almost all of his life in battles. He started his military career during the Crecy campaign of his father. When he was 16, Edward III placed him in command of vanguard in the Battle of Crecy, battling outnumbering French forces. His kind father even refused to knight him before the battle. At least he did that afterwards. Despite the victory of English, Edward nearly lost his life that day. He was reportedly disarmed and thrown to the ground by a French knight and was rescued by Sir Richard Fitzsimon, his standard bearer, who threw down the banner, stood over his body and beat back his assailants while he regained his feet. Edward did not accept this humiliation. Then, during the night following the victory, he ordered the execution of all wounded French soldiers who did not have enough pay to ransom. After this night off, a French militia who arrived as reinforcement were also annihilated by Edward and his troops. This vengeful act disappointed especially Edward of Woodstock's father. Such acts were an affront of his spirit of chivalry, and the king did not support it. The king was ashamed of his son. Legend relates that the Black Prince acquired his arm over Prince of Wales, favoring from the blind King John II of Bohemia, who perished heroically in the conflict. In the aftermath of the battle, the prince happened upon the body of a dead King John, taking his helmet lined with the ostrich feathers. The feathers and the dead king's motto Ich dien, I serve, were adopted by Edward as his own badge. They have been used by every subsequent Prince of Wales since. In 1355, he was appointed as King's Lieutenant in Gascony and ordered to lead an army into Aquitaine on a chevauchée, during which he pillaged Avignon and Castelnaudary, sacked Carcassonne and plundered Narbonne. The next year, 1356, on another chevauchée, he ravaged Avignon, Limousin and Berry and failed to take Bourges. He offered terms of peace to King John II of France, who had outflanked him near Poitiers, but refused to surrender himself as the price of their acceptance. This led to the Battle of Poitiers, where his army routed the French and took King John prisoner. When the battle was over, the King John II was brought to him. The prince received him with respect, helped him to take off his armor, and entertained him and the greater part of the princes and barons who had been made prisoners at supper. He served at the king's table, and would not sit down with him, declaring that he was not worthy to sit at table with so great king and so valiant a man, and speaking many comfortable words to him, for which the French praised him highly. The next day the Black Prince continued his retreat to Bordeaux. He marched warily, but no one ventured to attack him. Edward married his cousin Joan, fair maid of Kent, in 1362 at Windsor Castle. Jeanne was the daughter of hairless Edmund Plantagenet, Earl of Kent, and granddaughter of Edward I and his second wife Margaret of France. The marriage of Edward and Joan produced two children, Edward of Angoulême, born in 1365, and Richard of Bordeaux, later Richard II, who was born on 6th of January of 1367. Froissart described their household especially magnificent. The young Edward died in 1372 at the age of 6, leaving a second son, Richard of Bordeaux, as his father's heir. His parents were said to be grief-stricken and much affected. In 1367, Edward led an expedition to Castile in support of a deposed King Pedro of Castile. Edward defended the Spanish king against a controversial plot to put his illegitimate half-brother Henry of Samara on the throne. The prince's support was not universally well received by his lords. Nevertheless, Prince Edward felt it would be an insult to royalty itself to watch someone be replaced with a base-born relative. He led an army into Spain, over the pass of Roncesvalles, on the 3rd of April 1367, won a resounding victory at the Battle of Nájera in the northern Castile. We told already about that campaign when we spoke about Du Guesclin. He then marched to Burgos, when he declared Pedro the King of Castile. In gratitude for his military assistance, Pedro presented him a huge and magnificent ruby, which is still kept in the British crown jewels, and today adorns the imperial state crown. Edward remained in the Kingdom of Castile for the next 4 months, residing mainly in Valladolid. His army suffered badly during the hot Spanish summer, and Edward himself began to exhibit the first symptoms of mortal disease, possibly dysentery. Pedro refused to pay Edward's campaign expenses, so he returned to Aquitaine. Having exhausted his financial resources with the high cost of Castilian campaign, he made himself highly unpopular with the nobility of the province due to a levy of taxes to pay for his Spanish expedition. Resultantly, the Aquitanian nobles rose in rebellion against his rule, and he responded by besieging Limoges. He was furious, and when the city fell to him, 3,000 of its inhabitants were mercilessly massacred. A year later, Edward fell ill and returned to England on the advice of his physician. His health fell in rapid decline, and realizing that he was dying, he spent much time in prayer and charitable work, and asked his father to protect his young son Richard after his demise. The Black Prince died at Westminster on the 8th of June in 1376, at the age of 45. He was buried in Canterbury Cathedral. A bronze effigy of a prince now marks the tomb. Edward's contemporary, the French chronicles Jean Froissart, called him the flower of chivalry, but as modern historians wrote, on the battlefield, Edward favored pragmatism over chivalry. Indeed, while Edward was displayed chivalrous behavior, such as treating noble prisoners with respect, reigning over a glittering court, and delighting in torments and hunting, at war he ruthlessly pursued unchivalrous, scourged-out policies against England's enemies. And on the battlefield, rather than chivalric knightly combat, Edward favored victory-producing tactics, such as smashing his army ranks with massed infantry, dismounted knights, longbowmen, and flank attacks. Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much. Like it if you do, subscribe if you want to hear more, and thank you very much. Bye bye.